Good afternoon or good evening. I'm not quite sure what time it is in Madrid at this time. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, gives me great pleasure to speak to you today, even though it is by Zoom. Hopefully, in the future, I'll be able to join you in person. So what we are going to talk about today is prenatal communication, attachment, and bonding. And so this is your Congress in November. Scientific research in the last few years has shown beyond doubt that an unborn child from the 6 months of conception, if not before, is a sensing, sensible, feeling, and remembering being. Therefore, everything that his or her mother experiences, feels, and thinks will have an impact on this child's body and mind. Here is a very brief video that I would like to play you, and I will play it twice because it goes by pretty quickly. Sorry about that. It takes a minute. Well, a while.
Insomma, basta, basta! Quando un bambino nasce, ha già un passato. Siete voi, non dimenticatelo, perché 9 mesi valgono una vita.
I will play that once more so that you can get it all.
Insomma, basta, basta! Quando un bambino nasce, ha già un...
So the reason I'm showing you this video is to demonstrate that the unborn child is very much in contact with the outside world and with his or her mother. And anything that happens, the child will react to. So we have 3 types of communication between the unborn child and its mother. And the first one is physiological communication. And that's pretty straightforward. Stress, anxiety, depression will produce stress hormones. Also, of course, effects of famine, psychiatric disorders, external factors like radiation and disruptive chemicals. All of these communicate to the child in a physiological way. Another way of communicating is what we call behavioral communication. And this was first used by Brazelton in 1974, very famous child psychiatrist in Boston. Mothers talk, play, dance, stroke abdomen, all of these things communicate behaviorally by doing something, by actions. Play music, particularly Baroque composers, especially Mozart. Babies kick gently and violently. That's the way babies communicate to their mothers. And if the mother is sensitive to those kinds of communications, of course, then the communication will be good. If she is not sensitive, if she pays no attention to the baby kicking in a kind of protestation, then of course we are going to have problems. Research in France has shown that when a mother speaks directly to her unborn child, his heart rate increases. When she turns away and speaks, baby's heart rate returns to normal. Babies are very much attuned to their mother's voices and, of course, her thoughts and her feelings. There has been a lot of research now. We don't have time to go into it all, but I will just mention one or two outstanding ones. This one here was already done quite a while ago in the 1950s and 60s. And female rats were trained to avoid shock when a conditional stimulus was presented, a loud buzzer. After training, they were mated. During their pregnancies, the conditional stimulus, but no shock was presented. Therefore, these animals were stressed psychologically because they were expecting the shock, but they did not get it. So that's where the stress came in without actual physical stress. So nothing was done to them physiologically. They were definitely psychologically stressed. Very interesting result. Shocked mother rats against non-shocked mother rats controls were compared. After birth, half of the pups from the trained anxious mothers were given to the non-anxious mothers and vice versa, a procedure known as cross-fostering. Very clever way of doing research. What they found was that regardless of which mothers these pup rats were reared by, pups from anxious mothers were more anxious. When placed in an open field, for example, there was increased defecation and decreased activity. That's how we measure anxiety in rats. Stressed mothers demonstrated a different parenting style, eliciting more negative reactions in the pups they raised. And finally, stressed pups elicited more negative maternal behavior from unstressed mothers. So think about this and then think about how adopted children behave and how so many adopted children, of course, come from difficult pregnancies or pregnancies where the mother was anxious, didn't quite know whether she was going to keep the child or not. All of these things, of course, would produce stress. And those children, when they are born, are more stressed, no matter how good the adoptive mother will be. Another form of communication, and the one that is most interesting, but scientifically difficult to prove, is what I call sympathetic communication. Often mothers have an intuitive knowledge of the sex, physical characteristics, and personality of their unborn child. Mothers' dreams may be communications from their unborn child. And I have lots of examples on that, but in 45 minutes that I have at my disposal, I don't have time to go into that. Also, children refusing to bond with mothers who wish to abort them. And again, there are lots of examples about that. And then there are Alexandra Piontelli, a Italian analyst and pediatrician with ultrasound observations that I recommend highly for you to look into if you are interested in this area. Two of my friends made this very interesting little example, which any of you can replicate. This is what they said. Here we kept two labeled jars. Here's one labeled jar. Here's another one of cooked rice on top of our piano, not too far apart, so that they would have the same light and room temperature. Toward the rice on the left, we daily directed our voices, saying, "Thank you, you are beautiful." Toward the rice on the right, we daily directed our voices, saying, "You fool, you stink." After 3 months, here is what the rice looked like. You can see how this one on the right, which they spoke to in a nasty way, "you fool," is deteriorating very, very rapidly, whereas the one on the left is still looking pretty good. And this is 5 months after the start of the experiment. Again, the right one is almost totally deteriorated. The one on the left is in fairly good shape. Here is a neonatal intensive care unit. I went to visit a neonatal care unit a few years ago, and there were 36 of these bassinets around, and about half of them, as you can see up here, had names attached to them. The other half did not have names. I asked the head nurse why so many of the babies did not have names. And she said, because the parents of those babies do not want to become too attached to them in case they should die. Well, I can tell you with absolute certainty that those babies without names will have a much higher rate of morbidity and mortality than the babies with names. How you speak to children, born and unborn, makes a huge difference to their health and, of course, to their mental and emotional development. So, a word or two about attachment and bonding. A child's first relationship is a love relationship that will have profound, long-lasting effects on an individual's subsequent development. This attachment starts not as is commonly assumed at birth, but at conception, and represents an enduring emotional relationship between a child and her or his mother. Maternal bonding is defined as a pregnant woman's emotional relationship with her child, which of course also starts at conception. So the difference between attachment and bonding: attachment are the feelings of the child to the mother, bonding, feelings of the mother to the child. Attachment imprints occur long before birth. Therefore, there is a need to cultivate secure attachment in unborn children. In order for internal working models to form in the child's mind, the capacities for learning and storing memories must be operative. The hippocampus is the limbic structure that plays the most significant role in converting learned information and socio-emotional experience to long-term memories that can be recalled explicitly. Because observational research has shown that the hippocampus is fully formed and operative at 13 weeks gestational age. The mechanisms involved in the development and storage of internal working models are functioning in human beings by the second trimester. Very important to remember. Promoting a strong bond between a mother and her unborn child is essential for secure attachment outcomes. Clinicians, and I would imagine that's many of you in the audience here, clinicians can assist in this process by recognizing the memory capacities of a second and third trimester fetus. Attachment characteristics and behaviors can be adaptively imprinted onto the brain and nervous system of a child in utero through attachment-oriented interventions that increase emotional security in the expectant mothers. Attachment-based interventions can switch on genes involved in neurotransmission that contribute to attachment security. If a secure mental representation is cultivated for an expectant mother through the therapeutic process, this model can be drawn upon, internalized, and remembered by her unborn child during gestation. So if the mother is healthy, there's a very good chance, certainly a greater chance of having a healthy baby. Promoting a strong between mother and her child is essential for secure attachment outcomes postnatally. Okay, we'll just skip that. So, what is the effect of maternal stress on the unborn child? We shall be speaking about stress, the effect of maternal stress on the fetal brain. We shall talk about maternal depression, the effect of depression on the unborn child, maternal anxiety, if we have time, maternal addictions, other factors, and of course, points to remember. So, stress. One simple way of defining stress is to say that it is the external or internal demands that we face to accommodate change. Stress becomes negative when adaptation or coping mechanisms fail. A more scientific explanation is to divide stress into allostosis, which is the body's response to danger, real or perceived. This is very important because perceived danger, thoughts of danger, can have the same effect on the body as real danger. And in allostasis, changes to maintain homeostasis will happen through a complex interaction of brain, endocrine system, and the immune system. Allostatic load is usually what we think of as negative stress. It's an accumulated burden on our bodies created by systems evolved to combat emergencies, in other words, stress. When that occurs, we become vulnerable to stress-related illnesses, from common cold to heart disease. And that's Brooks McEwen's work in the year 2000. Oops, sorry. So these are some of the factors that contribute to stress, of course. We shall be talking about general anxiety, depression, COVID-19, of course, lately, undernutrition, smoking and alcohol, birth complications. Okay, this is one of the most important slides that I will show you. This is very, very important to remember. What we have here is the development of the cerebral cortex, and neurons move from the center of what will become the brain to the periphery, to the sixth layer here at the top. And each neuron moves along what's called a cortical ladder. And these are made up of glial cells. The cortical ladder is made up of glial cells. So this is what you need to remember. Each of these neurons in the center here is programmed to end up in a particular place in the brain. So let's say that we have neuron A here, and it's programmed to go to point B. However, if there is too much stress, which means too much cortisone, or if there are too many toxic substances in the blood system, if there is too much, if the pregnant woman is smoking too much, so there's too much nicotine, or if she's taking drugs like opium, heroin, any stuff like that, all those substances will interfere with the journey of this hormone. And instead of going from A to B, it might just go to C or D. Or if there is really, really a lot of stress hormone, the neurons will actually be destroyed. So what you end up with, this is really important, what you end up with is a uh, disrupted hardwiring of the brain. So the brain, this child is going to be born with a miswired brain. And so that's like your computer with a miswired hard drive. This will create problems for this child for a long time. So the stress response can be divided into two: rapid response, which is the fight-flight response, which means that the sympathetic system activation with a great outpouring of adrenaline and noradrenaline, and parasympathetic system inhibition of eating and sleeping. The slower response is through the Hpa axis. Here is a picture of the brain cut in half. And this is also very important. So what happens when a pregnant woman or any one of us is under stress is that, of course, we are getting ready for the fight-flight response, because that's what danger represents. So what we have is we have increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, increased production of blood sugar. All of this is good. What is not good is that there's a decrease in the blood flow to the gastrointestinal tract, which would be fine by itself, but also there's a decrease of blood flow to the uterus. And this, of course, is not good, because during the time that the uterus receives less blood, the baby receives less blood. So the baby is going to receive less oxygen and less nutrients, which is all very unhealthy for the baby. So the problem then becomes a decreased supply of nutrients and oxygen to the baby when the mother is under stress, plus the fact that the stress hormones will interfere with the regular architecture of the brain. This is the Hpa axis. I'm sure you have heard of that. The Hpa axis is from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, from the pituitary to the adrenal cortex, producing cortisol. Now, one of the things that happens in humans is that we can, as I have mentioned a few minutes ago, we can also create danger in our minds. There does not have to be a huge bus coming up against us as we are crossing the street to make us anxious. The thought of not knowing perhaps who the father of the child is, or whether I'm going to keep that child or not, all of those kinds of thoughts create stress. And so without stress, if we just have like a moment of stress, and we are just, let's say, running to catch a streetcar, what will happen is that the amygdala, right here, the amygdala will send positive signals to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to create corticotrophic hormone, which gets to the pituitary. The pituitary then, in response to CRF, produces ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, which goes to the adrenal cortex, which produces cortisol. When there is enough cortisol in the blood and the stress has stopped, the amygdala will stop sending signals to the hypothalamus. The hippocampus will put the brakes on the hypothalamus, and as a result, everything will go back to normal. However, if this woman is under constant emotional stress, the amygdala is going to overwhelm the hippocampus. The amygdala will continue to send stimuli to the hypothalamus, telling it to produce more CRF, etc. And the hippocampus will not have enough power to put the brakes on the system. So you have more and more stress hormones being produced all the time. And that's how the mother comes to be in a chronic state of stress. So what are the effects of stress on the unborn child? We have mentioned cell migration to the wrong destination, formation of wrong circuits, destruction of neurons, and of course, destruction of synapses, particularly in the amygdala and the hippocampus, which will interfere with memory. I'm just checking the time. And a hypothalamic and reticular activating system, which interferes with internal states. Also, what we have not mentioned, stress will interfere with genes. And so some genes will be turned on and some genes will be turned off. And usually this will result in ill health. Because of what we have just said, the amygdala hippocampus, there will be decreases in capacity to learn. There will be inhibition of dendritic branching. These here you can see are dendrites. This is a regular animal with regular dendrites. This one here was put under stress, and notice the many fewer dendrites in this animal that was being stressed. Decreases brain corticosteroid receptors, sensitizes certain receptor sites, decreases ability to deal with stress. Sometimes you may hear people say that stress makes you stronger. Not true. It may build character, but it does not make you stronger. Every time you're exposed to stress, your physiology, your body suffers. Stress decreases serotonin in the brain, and you all know about serotonin, I'm sure. Just to review it, low serotonin in some people leads to depression. In men, low serotonin, again, in some men, leads to violence. Serotonin regulates breathing, heart rate, body temperature, arousal from sleep, development of limbic neurocircuitry involved in emotional processing. So this is a very important substance in our bodies. Continuing on the effects of maternal stress, changes in astrocytes. Astrocytes are like glial cells in the brain, very important for helping brain conduction and cognitive functioning. 11, increases neuronal irritability, reduces brain weight. Autonomic system becomes overcharged. So from that, you will have health risks and certain pathological personality traits. And we'll come back to that in a second. Excuse me. Very important, suppresses immune and inflammatory response. This, of course, is in the baby, but also in all of us when we are stressed. And destruction of neurons in the cerebellum. This is a fairly recently discovered effect. The cerebellum, for a long time, was thought to be only, its main function was to give us a sense of equilibrium. physical equilibrium, when we walk, when we stand, when we sit. But lately, it has been discovered that the cerebellum contains the majority of neurons in the human brain. The cerebellum, once thought to be limited to controlling movement, is also involved in attention, thinking, planning, and decision making. So you can see that if neurons in the cerebellum are affected by stress, this is going to be a major problem for this child. The cerebellum also serves as a quality check on movement. It also checks our thoughts as well, smoothing them out, correcting them, perfecting things. It's sort of like a chef in an expensive restaurant who checks every plate before it actually goes out to the customers. That's what the cerebellum does for all our thoughts. Incredibly important. Stress decreases production of oxytocin and increases the production of vasopressin. Oxytocin has been referred to as the love hormone, whereas vasopressin is a much more aggressive kind of hormone. So obviously this is not good for a person because they will become more hostile and less loving. Also, males tend to become feminized, females masculinized. That's a fairly complex subject that we don't really have time to go into, but I can mention the fact that male and female brains are wired differently. I'm going to skip that because we are running out of time. This is important. The results established that male brains are optimized for intra-hemispheric and female brains for inter-hemispheric communication. I will show you what I mean by that. So this one here is a female brain, inter-hemispheric, from left to right, lots and lots and lots of connections. Male brains tend to be intra-hemispheric, meaning inside. So males are much more left-brained, and they don't have quite the same capacity to see like 180 degrees of any room that they enter, or they tend to focus on one part of the room, let's say, whereas a woman is able to see everything in the room at the same time. Here's another picture. Okay. And one of the differences between male brains and female brains is the corpus callosum, which is a bridge of connective tissue between the left and the right brain, and it is larger in women, which is another reason why women tend to think more with both sides of the brain at the same time as opposed to men, because they have better connections between the two sides of the brain. Here is a very, very important contribution by Alan Shore. I think this was last year. He published in Infant Mental Health Journal, and it was called All Our Sons, the Developmental Neurobiology and Neuroendocrinology of Boys at Risk. And what he has discovered is that the stress regulating circuits of the male brain mature more slowly than those of the female in the prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal critical periods. And this accounts for the higher morbidity and mortality in boys against girls at every stage of life. Also, number 19, inhibition of prefrontal cortex, thereby favoring instinctual responses over more complex intellectual functions. Facilitates the encoding of aversively charged, in other words, negatively charged emotional memories starting at the amygdala, increases congenital malformations, cleft lip, cleft palate, spina bifida. And a word about telomeres. Stress shortens telomeres, the protective nucleoprotein end caps of chromosomes. Their role is to help maintain the DNA ends of chromosomes following cell division. They play a complex role in cellular processes, including not only cellular senescence and apoptosis, but also chromosomal transcriptional regulation, chromosome stability, mitochondrial function, and cellular differentiation. Telomere lengths is measured in a variety of different tissues, including peripheral blood, saliva, and swabs in the mouth. And here is a picture of telomere. Each time a normal cell divides, telomeres, bits of DNA at the ends of its chromosomes, get a little shorter. When the telomeres get too short, the cell can no longer divide and ultimately dies. Dwindling telomeres may be a major factor in the body's aging process. Okay, I will have to skip this because we are running out of time. Prenatal stress and low birth weight. Excessive and sustained stress may predispose to low birth weight and prematurity, and the two of them very often go hand in hand. As birth weight progressively decreases, it's more likely that an individual will suffer from depression and anxiety later in life. Low birth weight babies also tended to have shorter height and lower body weight at ages 6 and 11 years, did poorly on cognitive tests at ages 8 and 11 years. Even when other factors known to contribute to mental health were taken into account, such as major stressful life events and parental divorce, low birth weight was still associated with increased risk. Maternal stress and autism has also been examined and studied. Autism risk doubles in babies born prematurely and low birth weight. Older mothers are more likely than younger ones to have a child with autism. Older fathers significantly contribute to the risk of the disorders when their partners are under 30, which is interesting. When the father was over 40 and the mother under 30, the increased risk was 59% greater than for younger men. By contrast, for women 30 and older, the risk of autism arose only 13% when the father was over 40. We don't know why this happens, but those are the results of research. Maternal stress and schizophrenia. Women pregnant in a war zone are more likely to give birth to a child who develops schizophrenia. And this was a study from New York University School of Medicine. Prematurity and IQ. 18,000 children, cognitive testing at ages 6.5. Babies born at 38 or 37 weeks, though considered normal, show slightly lower IQs, increased mortality in infancy, increased risk of neonatal seizures. This is troubling because an increased number of births are induced at 38 or 37 weeks. And that is particularly true in some of the South American countries. Low birth weight and ADHD, domestic violence. So, summary, health effects of maternal stress. Excessive and sustained stress. So please remember, we are not talking about, 5 minutes of stress because you, I don't know, have to have to rush to get to your next appointment. Nothing like that. What we are looking at is excessive or chronic. Low birth weight, prematurity, congenital malformations. So I don't think we mentioned SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Serotonin defects in the brainstem may be responsible for SIDS, heart disease, hypertension, cancer. Dyslipidemia, in other words, too much cholesterol, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, susceptibility to seizures, inhibition of the immune system, decreased ability to deal with stress, premature aging, and we have not spoken of this, exhaustion of the adrenals. So as a result of the exhaustion of the adrenals, there is decreased cortisol, which then will lead to an overcharged immune system, which may turn against its own body by producing rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. These are 4 of the best known. Effect of maternal stress on personality. Excessive and sustained stress may predispose to personality disorders as a result of poor academic performance and poor capacity to learn from past mistakes because of decreased neurons in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, as we already discussed. And antisocial behavior, more hostile because of decreased oxytocin, decreased serotonin, increased vasopressin. Adult psychopathy. The amygdala plays a major role in fear recognition. If impaired, a person tends to take abnormal risks, does not learn from past mistakes, and lacks empathy. Okay, unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I wanted to speak about depression and pregnancy, but we don't have time of that. Let's just say that 25% of infants or depressed mothers were born prematurely against only 7% of non-depressed mothers. 34% of infants of depressed mothers were low birth weight against 14% of non-depressed mothers. Higher maternal depression during pregnancy results in elevated cortisol and norepinephrine levels, prematurity, and low birth weight. Depressed pregnant women have twice the risk of preterm delivery than pregnant women with no symptoms of depression. The more severe the woman's depression, the greater their risk of delivering preterm. We shall have to skip and move on. I did want to mention birth complications before we finish. Birth complications may join with other factors to cause autism. Increased risk factors are older maternal age, threatened miscarriage, labor induction, labor duration of less than 1 hour, more likely to have experienced fetal distress, C-sections, APGAR score of less than 6 at 1 minute, more likely to be firstborn. Birth complications combined with early maternal rejection. This is a very, very interesting research done by Adrian Rain, P. Brenman, and son of A. Mednick in 1994. They worked both in Denmark and the United States. And they looked at 4.5% of subjects of 100%, 4.5% of subjects had both risk factors. In other words, birth complications and early maternal rejection. This small group accounted for 18% of all violent crimes in Denmark. 149 children aged 9 to 12 years were screened for behavioral inhibition, a tendency to exhibit a fearful disposition and withdrawal in unfamiliar contexts and situations, and assessed for social anxiety symptoms using parent and child reports. Results indicated that children who experienced perinatal complications, such as heavy bleeding, severe illness, hypertension, or excessive fluid retention, were higher in BI and social anxiety than were children who did not experience complications, BI behavioral inhibition. Furthermore, there was an indirect effect between perinatal complications and social anxiety. These findings provide further support for the established relation between perinatal complications and anxiety and demonstrate for the first time that this relation may be mediated by temperament, setting the stage for longitudinal analysis. Imagine a world where every baby is welcomed into the world with conscious conception, prenatal bonding, and a safe and non-traumatic birth. Imagine a world where when babies are seen, heard, and treated with gentle and loving respect by birth workers, medical personnel, parents, and family, who recognize babies as the conscious and sentient beings they are, celebrated and understood, and supported by parents, family, and educators as their purpose in life unfolds, supported with unconditional love, unbiased acceptance while growing and developing within an environment of family and community collaboration. And finally, guided in becoming an adult who is motivated and equipped to seek peaceful solutions and to create a more caring and compassionate world. If I had my way, every pregnant mother would wear a t-shirt which says baby under construction. A healthy womb will provide us with a healthy world. And just a word about the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Health, which is a nonprofit public benefit corporation based in the United States, which I founded many, many years ago. If you want to find out more about APA, go to birthpsychology.com. Thank you very much for your attention and good luck wherever you go. Bye-bye for now.